when you're grieving, you are broken open, and a lot of people don't know what to say and are steering clear. And so when someone says something, it feels more special. It feels more useful. If you finish like a really big workout
Hmm.
and then you're stretching with the instructor, and whichever stretch you happen to do feels like particularly great. I'm like, oh yeah, my calves are stiff. But it's like if you're broken and then someone gives you something useful, it feels so resonant.
Hmm.
So I think that 95% is partly it's because when we're grieving, our minds are very much plastic, open to change, we're looking so deeply for things that can help with that pain that when it comes in straight to our phone, it resonates and feels helpful.
This is the Buried in Work podcast, where we share tips and interview experts to help you simplify estate planning and end-of-life tasks.
I'm your host, Adam Zuckerman, and today we are joined by Emma Payne, the innovative CEO of HelpText. Emma is at the forefront of humanizing mental health care by delivering grief, caregiver, and mental health support via text messages to people around the world. It's a little bit innovative, it is very impactful, and we're glad to have her here today. She has a wonderful track record and a mission to break down barriers to mental health support, and her insights will be invaluable for anybody that's looking to understand how technology can play a role in supporting individuals through life's most challenging moments. Emma, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Awesome intro. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. You should hire us for PR.
I
All right,
totally
so
should.
let's hop in. A lot of people might not be familiar with HelpText, and we definitely want to change that. Why don't we start, though, before we talk about the company, by talking about you? What's your background? How the heck did you find yourself in a situation where you were running an innovative death tech company?
Yeah, I did not imagine myself running a global company providing grief support. That is for sure. So I had about 20 years experience using mobile and web technology for a whole range of things. We did caregiver coordination. I'd done suicide prevention, youth voter registration, things like that. So I had lots of experience there. And then my husband died by suicide. And then his best friend and cousin died of cancer. And the best friend had asked me to speak at his funeral, which of course I agreed to do, but it was a very daunting proposition because of his relationship with my husband. What essentially happened is that I walked into a church and spoke to a couple hundred people who I hadn't heard from when my husband died, and then proceeded to spend the whole weekend through the pub night hearing versions of, I'm sorry I didn't reach out back then, I didn't know what to say. It was the first time I knew someone who died, then too much time passed and it was embarrassing, I was scared I would upset you, and so on. So then on my flight home, I was like, well, that's crazy. I spent years not hearing from people, and 100 people spent years feeling badly about that. And so can I take what I've learned about mobile tech and apply that to grief? Is there a way to just like super simply help people when they're grieving, which led to help texts? So yeah, we're just doing the simplest thing imaginable, which is texting people the best wisdom in the world when someone dies.
So go into that a little bit. So when you say texting, is it a person? Is it AI? Is it a computer on the back end? What is HelpText? What do people need to know about it?
We are the world's best grief and loss experts. Like we work with hundreds of people who are the expert in, let's say, sibling suicide or the experience of fathers after a stillbirth. And then we work with all of those people. We say, what are the best gems of wisdom that you would want to send to someone in that situation? And then we have a big bank of messages that are tagged based on hundreds of different parameters. And we text it to you with your name in it, with the name of the person who's died, right? With those pieces of wisdom. So not Gen AI, more like bank of wisdom, selected and curated just for you, texted straight to your phone, not an app, nothing to download, takes about 3 minutes to sign up. First text comes right away. No wait lists, no AI, just the best wisdom we can find, curated and sent straight to your phone.
Is it considered therapy?
It's therapeutic, deeply therapeutic. We do not consider it therapy. We don't get into a two-way therapeutic back and forth, but like our data, we have published data from around the world. And the incredible thing is that people don't ask for that. So when I first mapped this out on a plane ride, I for sure thought one-way text was an MVP. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we'll start here. This is what I can fund by selling my house, right? Like, let's text people really good stuff. But now that it's been years and years and we've expanded to all kinds of different areas, our subscribers are like, I don't want to talk about it, but thanks for sending this. It's really helpful. This is exactly what happened when my dad died. How did you know this is what I was feeling? This is right. They're not asking to go back and forwards. They're not asking for therapy. They're very happy to have this low threshold, super discreet messages straight to their phone all year long. We have a 95% acceptability rate, which is nuts. And this is a published data in big publications. 95% of our subscribers say that they find the texts helpful in their grief and that they feel more supported. And it's even higher than that with guys.
Most companies would absolutely kill for a 95%
I mean, it's goofy,
approval
right?
rating. Yeah.
A couple of years ago, when I first decided to hire a researcher, it was because I was just watching our subscriber support portal. I'm like, this can't be normal. This is not solicited feedback. This is people texting back. And if you think about it, it's people in the depths, like a third of our subscribers are in the first 3 months after a death, 60 something percent in the first 6 months. So this is people in deep pain who are taking the time to let us know how deeply helpful the messages are. I mean, it's amazing. So that's why we hired a researcher, started trying to really do a deep dive and see what we could get published to show how impactful one-way text messaging can be.
So walk me through that. You sign up, you choose a specific reason why you are experiencing grief, and then the messages are customized.
Yeah. We actually have support for all kinds of things, also caring for someone at the end of life with a terminal diagnosis, pet loss, pregnancy loss. But let's stick with a grief example. So let's say your dad died of cancer. You fill in a form. The first question says, first tell us the name of the person who's died. What was his relationship with you? If you're comfortable sharing how he died, let us know.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things get tagged in the back. You get a message right away saying, "Hi, Emma, we're so sorry that your dad died. This is how this works, and we'll be in touch again tomorrow." And then you're going to get messages curated, like I said, from this database of proprietary content that's for loss of a parent, loss of a father, loss to cancer, all these different things. If you were a caregiver for him before he died, you'll get messages about that experience.
Do the questions come all throughout the day? So 3:00 in the morning, if I don't have my phone on silent, my text message is telling me, "Oh, you're up in the middle of the night. We're so sorry."
No, we text people at noon, local, wherever they are in the world. We have subscribers in 44 countries. So wherever you are, you get your messages midday, which is what we have found to be best. I do think it would be kind of fun to have a feature where people could pick, but generally it's noon your time.
So one text a day. Are you at the point where if somebody is a subscriber for years that they start seeing repetitive texts, or they go, "Wait a minute, I learned this text or I saw this, a year and a half ago"? Or is the bank big enough that it walks you through a large experience?
Yeah, we have no repeating texts. One of our earliest subscribers was a woman named Anne who lives in rural Pennsylvania, and she signed up when her sister died, and she signed up within weeks of me launching the very first service back in early 2019. And so then flash forward to February 2020, she became our first person to ever renew. Well, we didn't even have a renewal feature. And she tried to renew the text, and we're like, oh, wow. Okay, can we do another 140 messages in the course of a year? So at least a couple times a week, plus special dates, anniversaries, so on. So we kept going, worked with more and more experts. Because she was grieving her sister, we got deeper into sibling loss, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2021, she renewed again. And then we kept going. And then in 2022, she renewed again. I was like, okay, I'm going to reach out to Anne and just talk to her. So I had the most amazing conversation. So she grew up living in a small town, population 5,000 people. Her dad was the funeral director. So she grew up in the funeral home.
Mm-hmm.
And so the grief support in her community was literally in her home, leaflets next to the funeral home entry, essentially. And her mom worked in hospice care. So her whole life, she'd grown up with grief and loss and death, and then her sister died. And what she said was, I knew already what was available to me, and I knew it wasn't going to help. So she essentially went to Instagram, and I think it was, and to see what she could find, found help text and signed up. And for her, it was life-changing.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of our subscriptions lets you add in supporters, friends, family who want to help and don't know how, building on my original funeral experience. So we also were texting Anne's friend.
Do they opt in, or are they
Yeah, they
just
have to
suddenly
opt
receiving
in. No,
emails
they
or
opt.
text messages rather?
Yeah, no, it's all HIPAA, GDPR compliant. They definitely opt in. But it was cool because not only did Anne renew for 4 years and got no repeating texts and beautiful content, but so did this friend with suggestions for how to support Anne.
All
So
right, so I'm going to interrupt you. Switching topics a little bit, we have a dog, Zeke. Some people have heard about him that listen to the podcast. He's our director of marketing. My wife is absolutely in love with Zeke. Theoretically, Zeke is playing, fetch in the front yard. Unfortunately, he gets hit by a car, and my wife is heartbroken, and she signs up for this, for your service, grief with pet, as mentioned. She opts in her sister, who is a twin. They're extremely close. Explain that relationship. So what does Gina get in terms of the text messages, and what is the text message comprised of for her sister? Is it, hey, we want you to do this, or we just sent this text message to Gina, will you check in with her at this point in time? I don't understand the support network and what would come into that ecosystem.
yeah, so Gina's getting expert grief support for disenfranchised grief, we call it often with pet loss, where it might not be taken as seriously by the people around you as you would like, right? So Gina's getting tailored support for the sudden death of a dog straight to her phone, rooted in current theoretical models of bereavement, etc. Her sister is getting a tip once a week for things that she can do to help Gina through her grief, to remember the dog, to, tomorrow would have been the anniversary of when Rover died. Here's a thing that you might do to help Gina honor the date. So date reminders, tips once a week.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, how are you ensuring that help text is personalizing to fit the needs of each subscriber? Because I say this oftentimes, you're unique just like everyone else. It's one thing to say that my dog was hit by a car. It's completely different when you start getting into the nuances of, I love him so much, he sleeps on my pillow, I got him when he was a puppy. Is that part of the process, or is it more generic?
We just had some data published in Death Studies, is a big acclaimed international journal, and we coded through thousands and thousands of responses from thousands and thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most common things was, I can't believe how much this matches what I'm experiencing. I needed to hear this exactly today. How did you know? And my explanation, so in answer to your question, I mean, it is quite tailored.
Mm-hmm.
It has your name in it. It has Rover's name in it. It's got Gina's name if you're supporting her. We know that it was a sudden death of a dog, right? So the messages are quite tailored, but we don't know that Rover slept on your pillow on Wednesday nights.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, 95% of people find it to be deeply personal and applicable. And I think, this is just my theory, I just think that it's like when you're grieving, you are broken open, and a lot of people don't know what to say and are steering clear. And so when someone says something, it feels more special. It feels more useful. If you finish like a really big workout
Mm-hmm.
and then you're stretching with the instructor, and whichever stretch you happen to do feels like particularly great. I'm like, oh yeah, my calves are stiff. But it's like if you're broken and then someone gives you something useful, it feels so resonant.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that 95% is partly because we're doing an awesome job. We work really hard
Yeah.
on the content and to bring the best wisdom we can. But partly it's because when we're grieving, our minds are very much plastic, open to change, we're looking so deeply for things that can help with that pain that when it comes in straight to our phone, it resonates and feels helpful.
And this process, grief certainly transcends location, by language. How many countries are you in? How many languages are you in? Are you finding that there's more pickup in English-speaking countries versus something else?
44 countries, 24 languages, all 50 states. It was a big day when someone in South Dakota signed up a few years ago, like, woohoo, that's all 50. We do have more pickup in English-speaking countries because we have more organizational partners in English-speaking countries. So, for example, in Australia, we work with an organization called Griefline, who actually sponsors free grief and pet loss support for any resident of Australia. We have a partner in the UK that does the same thing, Sue Ryder. They're a large charity. So any UK resident who signs up for grief support gets it free of charge from that charity. So because we have large partners, funding partners in English-speaking countries, we work with lots and lots of hospices in the US, for example, organizations that do tissue donation, organ donation, and they're footing the bill. Therefore, more people sign up. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that men find it particularly helpful. And with an approval rating, like you said, that's already high, is there a significant delta between men and women, or is there something that's unexplained, or possibly you do have research on why men may be so receptive to the service?
I think it's, our baseline is 95, so the delta can't be much, but, call it 1.5% or something. I think it's what we believe from just anecdotally asking and going back and from the qualitative feedback that comes in is that a few things. One, they're less likely to be doing anything else. So if a guy signs up for text support, it may well be that that's the only thing that he's doing to speak to his own grief, right? Including not talking to his friends, for example. So it feels that much more useful because there's not other things happening. But also what they say is they don't have to, even if you're going to go to a Zoom therapy group, you have to schedule it into your calendar. You have to bolster yourself for it. You have to be there with other people that you don't know. You might worry that you're going to, get choked up or have a hard time talking about the fact that your wife died of cancer. This is tough. This is tough stuff. And not everybody wants to. The idea that every single person will be better if they have therapy and talk to a therapist about what they're experiencing it's one idea, but it's not what our data says. That if you think about a public health model for bereavement, we usually talk about the sort of layers of the pyramid. And for the vast majority of people, if they feel supported in their grief, if they can work through their feelings and integrate the loss into their lives, they'll be fine. They will learn to carry the grief the way that we all do, right? This is a human experience that 100% of us experience. So not everybody needs to talk about it if they don't want to. So I think that men just find it to be easy. We worked with a really cool writer recently. Her name is Mary Frances O'Connor. She's a neuroscientist, and her book is called The Grieving Brain. So she takes this neuroscience look at grief. So one of her principles, for example, is that the brain is a predictive organ. And what it's trained to do, what we do thousands and thousands of times a day, is predict the next thing that's going to happen. So if you are used to your wife coming out to the pool when you're finishing your swim and bringing you a towel, you're going to keep having that experience. When you finish your swim, you're going to miss your wife and imagine that she's coming to bring you the towel. That doesn't mean you're going crazy if that's still happening 3 years later, right? When people talk about, it's complicated grief and it's a diagnosis, well, is it? Or is it just your brain functioning in the way that a brain functions? So we created this 8-part text series for Mary Frances. She knows that her texts resonate with men. We can then gear them that way in the back end because things are tagged based on 1 million parameters. And sure enough, the minute those texts start going out, we're hearing from our male subscribers, oh yeah, thank you, this is really helpful. Just give me an explanation for what the heck is going on in my brain.
You said earlier it's a one-way text. There's no back and forth dialogue. If you're sending a text, how are you receiving messages from people saying that this is resonating?
Yeah, thanks for, I realized that I incompletely answered that question originally. So we don't get into a therapeutic back and forwards, but every inbound message is read by my team who are all trained mental health professionals. And we do respond. People can respond. Usually it's thumbs up, hearts, thank you, this is really helpful. And then we categorize responses and replies and use them to, figure out what messages are really effective.
Okay.
But we also do respond if someone has lost their password, right? Because they've also lost their dad, let's say. And we respond if someone's in crisis. And when people give us feedback, we're like, thanks for that. A reminder that this is a one-way service, but thanks for the feedback. It helps us to prioritize care for other people in your situation.
Have you ever had a situation where someone has required help and you've had to step in to take action?
Yeah. Yep. So like a lot of other organizations like us, we have ethical guidelines and a crisis response protocol that's quite deep. We have a 15-minute response time. So if we see that someone's in crisis, they'll get an automatic response. Then we'll have within 15 minutes another response where we go through lots of steps, everything time-stamped and shared back with the organization, and we'll offer them a phone call if they want, a phone call from a seasoned mental health professional with experience in suicide prevention, crisis intervention. We will do that. In 5 years, it's happened maybe 5 or 6 times.
Okay.
Where we're worried enough. And, this isn't part of the published data, but I know we've saved lives. I think when someone has a way to express their deep, often it's like, I just can't stand the pain and I just want to be with her. Right? Grief is deeply painful. And when people are experiencing it, sometimes just hearing that that's normal, painful, but also normal. It's a human response to a deep, deep loss that you're going to keep having. We can help people to normalize it, give them really specific tools for how to cope, and it works.
It's interesting. So you mentioned the example of the pool. For me, my father, we found out that his leukemia came back. Well, shortly after we were doing some woodworking in the basement at my house, he walked up the stairs. Other listeners have heard this story before. He walked up the stairs. He said, "I'm tired." When he says he's tired, he goes to the hospital. So they checked him in to the hospital after running some tests, and he died 12 days later. But every time I do projects around the house, every time I go to Home Depot, every time I go to Lowe's, it's a call that if he wasn't in the car and I had downtime, I would literally call him and be like, "Hey, I'm going to Home Depot to pick up XYZ." So every single time I go, I can't just go and pick up, a box of nails or a screwdriver or a tool or whatever it is that I might need. I have to go to Home Depot to think about my dad to also pick up what I am looking for. And I imagine, version 12 of your platform coming out in an app, and it's geotagged going, "We know you're walking into Home Depot right now. It's okay to think about your father," because that grief, I feel it. It's real.
Yeah. It's also, kind of awesome, right? When I created the service, I naively thought that people would sign up when someone died. But then someone would sign up 3 years later, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later. Or my mom died when I was a teenager. Now I am 50. So we started working with a woman named Hope Edelman, who does a lot of work around long ago loss. She has books about meaning making over time. So then we created messages specifically for how you weave your loss into your life. And one of the current theoretical models of bereavement is called continuing bonds. So just because your dad has died doesn't mean that your relationship with him ends and that you can never discuss him or think about him again. That is an impossibility. So when people instead go, "Oh, going to Home Depot just really gives me like a little moment to think about my dad," and maybe that's okay. Maybe that's part of my healing. Maybe that's part of the way that he's going to show up for me, where I tell him what project I'm working on, because now we have, I don't know, a new baby and we're doing a renovation to put the room or whatever it might be. It's like this opportunity.
Yeah.
As opposed to something that has to be like swept under the rug, pushed down and never discussed. And I think that's why men love the text. Like, I had this interview, which I'll never forget it. It was for GeekWire, not that long ago, May, I think it was. And the interviewer started with quite a hard volley. Like, you can't really imagine that texts are going to help people with something as personal and complicated as grief. And I said, well, you'd be surprised when we send a message to someone recognizing that today would have been the anniversary of their daughter's stillbirth. They actually find, and she just burst into tears, the woman, the interviewer. I don't get any further than the first sentence. So here it is, the anniversary of her daughter's stillbirth 18 years prior. No one has remembered, right? This is like her date that she's holding and doesn't feel that she can talk about it because it was 18 years ago and so on. And in fact, honoring those dates, taking a moment when you go to Home Depot, why not? It's a nice way to keep your dad with you.
Yeah, and it seems like you found a happy way to split the difference between providing a service where someone may go, "Oh, I have to go to therapy, take time out of my day. This is going to be an hour. Someone's going to ask where I am." With providing something that's very valuable in my, intuition of this, that nobody cares if you get a text message, you read it, you check it when you want. Nobody needs to know what's going on. And it's almost like it's not a thing. And because it's not a thing, it's so beneficial.
I think that's really a big part of it. Read it or don't.
Yeah.
We had this girl, Renee, who's like, I just wait until after third period, and that's when I read the messages about my mom. And she's like, I've never deleted any of them. When I want to think about my mom, that's where I go. When I feel like it, when I have a moment that suits me, as opposed to now I have to carve out a whole hour
Yeah,
to talk about
exactly.
my dad with
Exactly.
someone I don't know. It's a complete, I mean, it's a very different thing, right? And that part about also texting the supporters creates another, just sticking with the example of when a dad dies. There's a woman named Sarah who was in her 20s when her dad died. And she found us on Instagram. She signs up for her texts. She's finding the texts helpful, and she adds in her boyfriend as her supporter. So now we start texting him suggestions for how to help her. And I only knew about this because after getting texts for a year, she posted something about how helpful it was. And then I ended up doing it, talking to her.
Hmm.
And she's like, these texts completely changed my experience. They gave me all kinds of ways to keep my dad with me, but also continue with my life, right? That moving forward doesn't mean forgetting, and that there are ways to integrate. But she also said, she's like, I don't actually know what you sent my boyfriend, but I do know that on my dad's birthday, he booked a table at his favorite restaurant and asked me for my favorite stories about my dad. So then I was like, do you think that would you mind introducing me to your boyfriend? Like, I'd love to hear his opinion. And Krish was like, essentially relieved. He's like, just thanks for telling me what to do, right? I love her. She's crying all the time. I want to make her feel better, but I can't. So thank you for telling me what to do. So we're saying, hey, tomorrow would be the anniversary of Sarah's dad's death or his birthday. Maybe you'd like to ask Sarah for her favorite stories or book a table at his favorite restaurant. Krish is like, oh yeah, thanks. That's a great idea. And then bada bang, it works. And now, that it changed not only Sarah's grief experience, but also his comfort that he can sit with the pain. He doesn't have
Hmm.
to make everything better. There are ways that he can simply let Sarah talk about her dad, and that will change things for them.
Wow.
Like, so sweet and also very simple.
And it's evolved. I mean, when you were sitting on the plane, I doubt that you were saying, I'm going to add this in and this in and this in. It's the back of the napkin, proverbial startup sketch.
Yeah, but it really wasn't. It actually was like an airplane. Like,
I
like
hope I hope that you still have that on the
I don't.
wall. Oh,
I know. It was 2015. We sent our first text. So I started the business in 2018, sent our first text February 2019 with as little idea as anyone else about what
mhm.
was around the corner. So yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, we had to add COVID as a cause of death early in the journey. Now we have vast amounts of
Mhm.
really cool functions for people like tissue banks who want to support their donor families after someone has died. Really interesting ways to work with organizations. We started just with grief after a death, but now we have terminal illness, pregnancy loss, pet loss. We have help texts for healthcare workers experiencing burnout and fatigue with scripts to help them talk to families
Mhm.
after a patient dies, and also how to care for themselves when a patient dies that's based on their occupation. We have text for health and well-being now, which has depression, financial stress, all sorts. So yeah, it's changed.
Yeah. It sounds like when you were sketching out on the napkin, it was focused on individuals. And I'm guessing, and I'd love your insight on this, that your journey is a little bit similar to the Buried in Work journey, where you start providing resources for one person, and then companies start coming to you and you go, wait a minute, we can then customize and go through HR benefits, through other things. Is that a focus, or are you 100% focused laser on individuals? Are you working with companies as well?
Oh, 92% of our business is with businesses.
Wow, that
Yeah.
much.
hmm Yeah. I think partly because we don't have a marketing budget, or we can't run ads. So we haven't spent time on the consumer side. So the first vertical we started working with was hospices. So in the US, hospices are required to provide 13 months of bereavement support. I didn't
Mhm.
even know that when I started the company. I started it, like you said, based on an individual thing, which is surely we can just text people expert grief support. I mean, it is crazy that you cannot find a therapist with grief and loss experience, that your best friend doesn't know what to say to you when your baby is stillborn. I mean, we can do better. So at the individual level, what's the simplest thing? Hey, let's text people the best wisdom in the world, and let's text their boyfriend and best friend as well so that they can help. Because in my experience, most of us have people who do want to help. It's just that we're frozen and we don't know how. So it started very much individual. But then I discovered that hospices in the US are required to provide 13 months of care, 13 months. So they might have one bereavement coordinator and, thousands of deaths a year. And so that bereavement coordinator is not going to have 140 personalized touch points that remembers everybody's birthdays and anniversaries and who died when and so on. And even if they could, not everybody wants that. So we work with lots and lots of hospices who now have us as an arrow in their quiver. If you'd like to get some easy, simple support straight to your phone, sign up here and off they go.
I love it. Can you give all of the listeners a month free to test things out? Because if you're focused on companies, we're working with companies too. They listen to the podcast, but there's also a lot of people that listen that are individuals that may say, hey, I need this. Can we create a code or some way? And obviously we've got some time because this is going to post in a bit, but
totally. Absolutely. Yeah, let's do it. Yes,
okay, awesome.
We'd love to.
So if you're listening to this podcast and the code isn't available, we did the test and the test has run. You should email and maybe she'll hook you up privately.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I would love to. That'd be fun. Yeah.
Okay, we'll connect after this.
For anyone who's listening, we'll set up a code for you.
I love it. We'll connect afterwards. Emma, thank you so much for sharing your insights, the incredible work that you're doing with HelpText. Truly, it sounds amazing. I'm probably going to go and sign up after you give me the code for a free month. If people want to find you directly, though, where do they go?
Helptexts.com. Let's make sure it's HelpTexts, plural. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for sharing about your dad. That's really, I like this Home Depot connection time with him. I like that idea.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny stories.
Was he a big fixer-upper?
Yeah, it's super handy. So he was a senior executive at the IRS. Our burb's name was Arissa, for those that are in the pension land. And when he retired, he started making whimsical, like Dr. Seuss birdhouses. And
really?
Yeah, it's amazing. I'll send you some pictures after. Super, super talented, warm guy. Even at the funeral, we had the birdhouses that he made,
Oh, wow. I love that. From the IRS to Dr. Seuss birdhouses.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And he's part of the reason, like why Buried in Work is called Buried in Work. It's punny, and that's his sense of humor. To give a glimpse. So we created a game for Buried in Work called One More Story, where it's 126 cards, different categories to help you capture memories from someone. And that day when we're sitting in the hospital asking him those questions, a nurse walks in, and without missing a beat, he turns to the nurse and goes, "Hey, nurse." And he knows her by name because he's been there for 6 years in and out over time. He goes, "Why is a giraffe's neck so long?" And she looks at him and she's like, "Andy, what are you talking about? I've got to take your vitals. Like, you're being ridiculous." And he goes, "So it can reach its head." And that's my dad. That's why Buried in Work takes a very fun approach to what we're doing with a very serious impact. And
that's awesome.
Your company that you started, HelpText, it's emotional for me in a lot of ways because I think he'd appreciate what you guys are doing. So thanks for the time.
Thanks. Yeah, awesome to chat with you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Buried in Work podcast. Remember, you can save 10% on our estate preparation package and games with code podcast10 at buriedinwork.com.